People who have quit a job, what was the final straw? I was a receptionist for a medical software company. Boss refused my request for a single day off to take my teen daughter to get eye surgery. I waited until the first day of her 2-week vacation and put in my notice. Ruined her holiday. Next comment. I worked for a call center for AT&T. I refused to try and sell a direct TV package to a woman who was literally bawling her eyes out on the phone because she was having to switch her phone plan to her name instead of her husband's name because he had just passed. I was waiting tables while I was in grad school. I had requested a weekend off far in advance, right after I got my syllabus, because there was a seminar pertinent to a class. Our professor expected us to go and write a paper. It was a decent chunk of our grade. The weekend comes up, and lo and behold, I'm scheduled double Fridays through Sunday. I hunt down the manager and I say I can't do that, and I've given months' notice. She pulls the request or just request, not guarantees. And I tell her point blank, I will fail this class if I don't go. She shrugged. She said, that isn't my problem. I told her, it is now, and left. Like I was going to fail a class for my master's degree, waiting tables at Rainforest Cafe. Next comment. I really don't get why managers act like this. Why be a jerk? I know it's power tripping and jealousy, but it's shocking to me how prevalent it is. I say jealousy because the boss knows your degree will allow you to get away from that job someday. Next comment. One of my roommates was working at a retail store in the mall in college. He told the manager, finals are coming up, so I can't work Monday, Tuesday, or Friday, but all other days are open. He comes in Saturday before, and he's only scheduled for Monday, Tuesday, and Fridays. He was like, WTF? And his manager actually asked, what's more important, your education or your career with Hollister? He worked part time and his parents were pretty well off, so he said, well, I guess my education is more important than a part time retail job. I'm only working for beer money. Have fun with your career at Hollister, and walked off the job. We just couldn't believe his manager thought that was a convincing argument. Career at Hollister. My manager at Panera was upset when I quit to go back to college. I made about $9 an hour at best. She was upset because a lot of people were quitting to go back to college because summer was over. Next comment. It's always so ridiculous when a manager is told by an employee they can't work a certain time and the response is, that's not my problem. It is, because that's your job. And if they truly cannot be there, then yes, it will be your problem in the end. You'll have a shift with no one covering it. Next comment. I was screamed at for wanting time off for my mom's burial because you already had the time off for the funeral. The funeral was one weekend and the burial was the following. I worked Monday through Friday, but those 2 weeks, they wanted me in on Saturday and Sunday too. I told her she could fire me if she wanted to, but I see her Monday. She tried to make my life heck, but when everyone else found out about it, they made her life heck, and she quit a few months later. Next comment. That royally sucks. My boss made me come in when I called her that morning before my shift, openly sobbing on the phone, saying I needed the day off to grieve because my friend just died of cancer. She had the temerity to say, it's not a good time right now for you to call off. And I about screamed, yeah, it's not a good time now that my friend died. When I got to work, she tried to play sympathetic peer while I'm still crying. because I hadn't stopped even during my commute. Next comment. My mom was sick for over 20 years, had a heart transplant, and finally got cancer. She went into the hospital, and I knew that she was going to pass away there in a few weeks. I told the branch manager what was going on, and I would be taking a few weeks off when my mom died. This was before cell phones, by the way. My mom passed on Saturday. I called the boss's home phone Sunday night and leave a message telling her what happened. I got a call Monday morning wanting to know if I was coming to work and why I wasn't at work. I was floored and really didn't know what to say. I'd been at this place for 15 years and never missed a day of work, so it was extra hurtful. They called me later in the day to apologize. I ended up leaving there a few months later. But wait, there's more. Got a new job, and a year after my mom passed, my dad gets liver cancer, and it's stage 4. I tell the branch manager at the new job what is going on. His kid had died of brain cancer, so I thought, cool, this guy gets it. 8 months later, my dad passes. I called out for 3 days and honestly was not ready to come back, so ended up calling out all week. When I showed up Monday and the route supervisor told me don't go in the office, I'm going to ride with you today and things are ready to go. He was super cool and we leave the shop. We get to the end of the street and he tells me they were going to call you on the carpet and question your commitment to the job and your dedication to the company. He was afraid I'd walk on the spot. I wouldn't have done that, but sure would have said things I regretted. I thanked my immediate boss for preventing that and ended up leaving a couple months later. I then made the giant mistake of giving more than 2 weeks' notice, thinking I'd do them a favor, and with 4 weeks' notice, so I could train a new person. They started trashing me and my work, and it just didn't go well. It snowed my last day, and I said forget it, and didn't go in. I have a great job now, and they would give me all the time I needed if something like that were to happen. But I would never, ever, ever give more than 2 weeks' notice when leaving a job, no matter how great it is. Next comment. My manager started snapping her fingers in my face, 3 inches away from my eyes, saying in a slow drawl, "You're doing it wrong. Hello. That's not how I told you to do it." When I was folding the shirts, somewhat slower and less optimally than I was shown, though achieving the same fold, also it was my third week and one of 20 folds I had to learn on that job. I walked right then and there. I was working when I got a call that my partner of 7 years had been in a terrible car accident while visiting family in Florida. He was in the hospital and his mother called me to tell me he wasn't awake yet. I was obviously devastated and scared out of my mind. Told my coworker and boss because it was obvious I was panicking, and they told me to take the rest of the weekend off so I could deal with things and prepare and clean his apartment for when or if he got back. Specifically, they said to come back Monday, and it was a Friday. Next day, I was cleaning up his apartment when I got the call from my boss screaming about why I hadn't come into work that day. I told him that I recalled him telling me to take the weekend off and come back Monday. He said to come to work immediately because they needed me. Against my better judgment and my emotional state, I showed up and clocked in. Boss came up to me, threw the stack of checks down on the counter that had just come in, and told me, "If you do that again, you're fired." This was someone who had never yelled at me before or even dared to speak to me in any stern way. Prior to my arrival, their store was an absolute mess, and I spent all of my free time, what little there was, reorganizing and cleaning and setting up new systems. For some reason, the fact he chose to start speaking to me this way and demanding my attention now, at that time, it just made me snap. A chord was struck and it resonated strong. I got the message clearly. He was one of those bosses who become controlling of anyone who became of value to him and his business. The moment you aren't available when they need or even wanted you to be, they were going to make you feel bad about it. So you were afraid to ask for more personal time or any other leniencies that took you away from that job. I was literally reeling, saw red. The moment he turned his back, I snatched my check, walked out with a full line of customers at the counter and the phone going off with incoming orders, and drove off. He blew up my phone all day, never came back or called back. Fortunately, he made it home safe and healed up fine. However, he passed away on our anniversary a few years later. I regret every moment I pass up to spend time with him over that job or any job for that matter. I now I know barely anyone is going to read this now that is buried under a pile of other comments, but it still felt nice to type it out. Edit. I've probably said kind words over a dozen times, but I really do mean it. It can just be comforting as it can be cruel here on Reddit. So it means a lot that you've all carved out a few seconds from your day to recognize me and my story and to say some things, his name. And I want everyone to know what an amazing, brilliant, kind, gentle man he was. Strong, dark, and stern. Yet he was the light of my life. Please take the extra moment to ask your loved ones if they're okay. Next comment. My manager's boss did a surprise inspection, and my boss wrote me up for doing my job the exact way he trained me. Apparently, when he trained me, he was cutting corners. Next comment. Oh, I got fired for this exact thing. Doing the job exactly as I had been trained by the manager. Amazing. Next comment. One very busy night while waitressing, I was standing at a table of 12 in the middle of taking their order when another waitress came up to me and said our boss wanted us in their office that instant. So I leave my full section in the middle of chaos to go see what the problem is. My boss began to chew us both out because the other girl asked if I would switch shifts with her, and I had agreed. I didn't say anything, but was obviously annoyed because I had just left all my tables thinking there was some sort of emergency. My boss looked at me and asked why I looked mad, and I told him, I feel like this could have been sorted out without me. If you didn't want her to leave early, you could have just told her no instead of pulling me away from our customers. They said, if you're going to have an attitude, get your stuff and leave. I said, okay, and went to transfer my tables. I was over it. I had worked there 3 years, and the owners were alcoholics that treated us like garbage and spent all the company on themselves instead of getting ingredients to make food or paying their employees. The other waitress came back out and said our boss wanted me back in the office. I went in and they said, "Put your apron back on. You're not fired." I said, "You're both crazy if you think you can treat people the way you do and expect them to want to work for you." And I walked out. As I was leaving, they came out behind me, saying I would regret it, and I was never allowed back if I left. I threw up my middle finger and kept walking. Funny part is, I let my boyfriend take my car to work that night, so I had to walk a mile home and break into my own house. Next comment. The company told me I was to enforce two new policies. One, all employees must report to work 15 minutes early for their shift. However, they would not be paid for their time. Number two, all employees must take their unpaid lunch break in specific areas under very specific circumstances. I told them we needed to have a meeting to discuss the legality of their new policies before I could enforce them on my team. They replied, either you enforce the policies or you resign your position. I said, see ya. They begged me to reconsider and to not make a bad decision just because I was upset. Unfortunately, I was already out the door. Next comment. In my case, the business owner left for a vacation, 3 weeks. I was the sole developer of an app that managed his clients, and nobody else in the company knew a lick of programming. I was essentially a one man IT tech department. My boss asked someone, an accountant, to manage me while he was out because math is like programming, right? So, as a 45-year-old contractor building a complicated CRM app, I had to sit calmly as a 24-year-old accountant sat down next to me the day after the boss left and he said, so let's review your project. And then he tried to get me to pull the code so he could review it. I was in disbelief, but I did it. He was looking at it like it's some long dead language of mystical runes, just utterly lost. He started directing me to remove the characters that designate comments as comments. In other words, he didn't know how the comments looked. He wanted only plain text in paragraphs. And when I tried to explain that this would cause the compiler to execute the comments as code, he didn't even know what that meant. I told him, I don't think this is what the boss intended when he asked you to review. The guy insists it was. In frustration, I gave him an account on the private code repo and showed him how to pull code. I then told him it was up to him to figure out how to review and understand the code, how to implement fixes, and how to check them without breaking the code base. He insisted that I had to teach him everything I knew so that he could correct my mistakes. I told him that I could not teach someone my 25 years of programming experience in 3 weeks. Wildly, he corrected me to note that I needed to teach him how to be better than myself because he needed to be so good that he could correct my mistakes. And he expected me to do that in just a day or two because he was supposed to spend the next 3 weeks correcting me, not getting up to speed. I was dumbfounded by all this. I told him I couldn't do what he was asking. It was impossible. I told him if he thought it was possible, he could pursue that on his own, but I wanted no part of it. So he did. He perused online documents for a brief moment, then began doing whatever he thought he could do with the code and code repo. Of course, he broke it immediately, then tried to unbreak it, which broke it more, and he kept going. Eventually, he mostly destroyed everything, blamed me for not doing my job of teaching him how to be able to fix my errors. And I said, I'm going on vacation for 3 weeks too, or call me back when you get it fixed. What surprised me was that it took 2 days for the boss to call me from his vacation spot. Apparently, the accountant had spent 2 days trying to fix my code before admitting defeat and calling the owner. The owner asked me to take over, which I agreed to do so long as the boss clarified that the accountant was to review the end product, not the code underneath. And of course, I had to charge the owner to fix what the employee had destroyed. Next comment. I was already upset at my last job. I wanted a transfer because I had learned everything I could about the job. I was now getting bored. My buddy in the other department wanted me on his team and was told by my manager that I was too crucial to the team's success. She told me I hadn't earned it yet and because I was too green. That wasn't even the last straw. That finally happened when I was exempted from the annual raise because I started as a contractor. Missed the recently changed qualifications by a month. Even worse was when I found out that it was only a 38-cent raise. That measly raise would have sent a better message than raising the bar and excluding me from it. I had been casually searching for other jobs for some time and finally found a great job to replace it. One that was professional, step up, and they paid 40% more than I was making. To those that are afraid of jumping into the unknown, sometimes it's the best thing you can do for your career and pay. Managers will be more than happy to let your skills become stale because you're a team player that won't make a ruckus and stand up for yourself. Next comment: Godfather's Pizza. The manager wouldn't give me my paycheck at 8 p.m. on Sunday because the money might not be in the account yet, but I could pick it up at 9 a.m. Monday. This was decades ago before direct and mobile deposits. The bank wouldn't be open until the next day anyway. All of the paychecks were literally in his hand at that moment. There were lots of issues before that, but that was the final sign that the manager was completely uninterested in reason. In the next few weeks, nearly everyone else quit. Then the manager was finally fired. Next comment. Not me, but a colleague once wrote a long stinker of an email, hit send at 10:30 a.m. and exited the building immediately. He blind copied all receivers but sent it to multiple departments of a large multinational corporation I was working at. No one knew who did or didn't get the email, except for the gasp and OMGs around the office. He was completely disgruntled and went in on multiple managers, supervisors, and various colleagues with absolute venom. It was amazing. Still the best work email I've ever received. And some of it he called out actually had to be addressed by management. It brought about a lot of positive change. If you're out there, Khalil, that was awesome. Next comment. We had a coworker do that too. She was the accountant and exposed a lot of sketchy stuff that was being done in multiple areas and all the stuff she overheard. The CEO had to address the whole company about it because, same, no one knew who did or didn't get the email. Next comment. I was a supervisor of housekeeping at a hotel. Every holiday, all of management would take off, leaving me the highest in charge. I asked for a raise after working a full year of holidays as the only management and was denied the next year on the biggest party day in the city. I set all my employees up with their work and texted the managers a picture of me at the bar partying, telling them the hotel might be on fire. I don't know. I quit. They asked if I could finish out my shift. I just blocked their numbers. A lot of my housekeepers and laundry attendants cried and begged me to stay. Apparently, they really liked working for me. Next comment. I was exhausted. I had been working 50 hours a week and I couldn't wait until Christmas break. I was the only person out of 25 required to work Saturday mornings on a 6-week fundraiser in addition to my regular hours. Others were only scheduled once. I was scheduled all 6 Saturdays. Finally, a foreign colleague wanted to work Christmas so she could go to her home country early in the next year. The entire office was supposed to be closed for those 2 weeks. The boss picked me to be with her and refused to let me say no. I didn't want to take a break later when the rest of my family would have been off over Christmas, and I couldn't bear to have waited another 2 weeks, as I was barely hanging on right then. She wouldn't let it go, so I quit. The boss decided to work with herself. That was fine with me. The mystery is why it had to be me or her out of 25 coworkers. Well, not my problem. Next comment. The owner of the company told me to fire a woman for arriving to work right on time. It was always something different with him, some ridiculous new rule. that he applied retroactively to suit whatever mood he was in on any given day. And that particular morning, he took it as a personal insult and a show of blatant disrespect that his employees didn't arrive early. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't fire this woman, who I didn't even particularly like, to satisfy this new whim of his. So instead of firing her, I marched into his office and quit myself. Funnily enough, the woman I wouldn't fire continued working for him for years. She might even still be there now, 20 some years later. Next comment. I was working at home care for $10 an hour, and I had clients all over the city. My car wouldn't start one day. It was minus 40 C or so, and I called and told them I couldn't get to work. I was told to take the bus. I didn't have a winter jacket. I lived in a single wide trailer, barely making ends meet, and I layered sweatshirts in order to stay warm enough in my car and between my car to a client house. But it wasn't nearly warm enough to take the bus in. I swallowed my pride and told the scheduler that I didn't have a winter coat and I wasn't able to do that. She told me that she thought I just wanted the day off in a really snarky and dismissive tone. It made me cry. I couldn't afford to miss work. I told her, okay, hung up, and wrote my resignation letter. I expected compassion from somebody who worked in nursing and instead was mortified. I ended up at a much better job and for more pay and a lot more kindness. Next comment. Working as a mortuary transporter, the guy who picks up corpses and brings them back to the cremated. For a family owned crematory, boss was kind of a bee, and her husband was an idiot. Constant on call, overnight shifts, and zero PTO days. But honestly, I really enjoyed the work, so I put up with it. The problem was that my boss refused to do direct deposit. This was 2 years ago, so it's not like direct deposit was unheard of. And she'd hand us out checks on Monday. I'd be on call the weekend prior to payday, and it was really busy, particularly Sunday night. I was out from like 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. picking up corpses. So on Monday, I called out because I didn't want to have to drive a full shift on 0 hours of sleep. Well, in my constant sleep deprivation, I had forgotten I was supposed to get paid that Friday. I was talking to a coworker on our way to a pickup and mentioned how I couldn't wait to get paid next week. And he gave me this look and told me we got paid on Monday and asked if I had never gotten my check. So at the end of the day, I went to my boss and asked, and she just laughed and joked that she'd wondered when I would ask for it and had hoped I had just forgotten. So her playing cute with my checks was the beginning of the end. Then next payday, she sat us down and explained that from here on out, drivers were not allowed to call out simply because they'd worked all night before. By this point, she'd driven off all the other transporters and was down to me and one other dude full time, with another transporter coming in 2 days a week, and her business couldn't function if either of us called out. So I got my check from her, and then at the end of the day, I ended up working till 10 p.m. that night. I left her a note saying I quit effective immediately and to mail me my last check. A few months later, the other driver texted me and told me that she'd never replaced me and that he'd quit and got hired at another funeral home and convinced a part time driver to go with him. I just checked the website and apparently they're still open. I don't know how they managed with nobody to get the corpses. Next comment. When I was 20, I worked a commission job based off sales. The manager hated me for some reason. I genuinely, to this day, have no idea why. I tried really hard, had a good attitude, and followed all the rules. My sales were extraordinary, but I always met my numbers. My grandmother died about 6 months into the job. I texted my manager to tell him I'd be taking my 3 days of bereavement as allowed by the union. I even apologized for the inconvenience, as though I could control my grandmother's death. He called me the day after she died, accusing me of lying, saying I was lazy and just wanted the time off. Keep in mind, I never called out before, or even been more than 5 minutes late to a shift. I sent him medical documentation proving she'd had a stroke during the night and passed away. He called me back and said, fine, I could have the day off, but he better see me the next day, my third day of union protected bereavement, or I'd be fired. Stricken with grief, but terrified of losing my job, I drove the 2 hours back to my apartment from my grandmother's house that night. The next morning, I went to work tired and melancholy. He yelled at me to smile because no one wants to buy cell phones from a sad girl. I plastered on a smile and hit the sales floor. At lunchtime, I cried my eyes out in my car, reapplied my makeup, went back to work with my fake smile. I was in the middle of helping a customer when he comes bouldering up to the table and starts asking the customer all the same questions I had to see what the products they'd be eligible for. The customer was baffled and told him I'd already covered everything and that no further help was necessary. He went on a rant about what a terrible, useless employee I was. I looked at the customer and deadpan said, I'm so sorry to leave you with him, but as of this moment, I quit. The manager followed me to the break room, shouting and raving while I gathered my purse. I turned in my equipment and clocked out. He followed me to my car, still berating me. Finally, that same customer I walked away from came out and physically stood between me and the manager so I could get in my car and drive away. The manager proceeded to tell me every day for a week and leave abusive voicemails about me missing shifts because he didn't accept my resignation. He even called me the day of my grandmother's funeral and said now that she's been cremated, I had no excuse not to come back to work. Forget you, AT&T and Jeremy. I hope that he eventually got a taste of his own medicine.